The note was folded into a perfect little square, the kind of square a person makes when they have no strength left, but still need their words to survive. A nurse placed it in my hand in the hallway outside room 4112. She did not smile. She did not ask who I was. She only looked at me with tired eyes and whispered, "She begged me to give this to you, if you ever came. If you ever came." Those 4 words hit me harder than the hospital smell, harder than the blinking machines, harder than the month of excuses my husband had built between me and his mother. My fingers shook as I opened the paper. There were only 7 words inside. "Mara, I am not safe with him." For 1 second, the whole hospital seemed to tilt. I heard a cart rolling somewhere behind me. I heard a doctor calling for someone named Angela. I heard my own heartbeat pounding in my ears like someone was knocking from inside my chest. Then I looked through the half-open door of room 412 and saw my mother-in-law asleep under a thin white blanket, smaller than I remembered, pale as paper, with a bruise fading near the inside of her wrist. And for the first time in 10 years of marriage, I understood something about my husband. David had not been protecting his mother's peace. He had been protecting his secret. 1 month earlier, none of this would have made sense to me. 1 month earlier, I was still the wife who believed that marriage meant giving people the benefit of the doubt, even when doubt was all they deserved. David and I lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio, in a house with a blue front door and a porch swing I had refinished myself. We looked normal from the outside. Respectable. Comfortable. The kind of couple people asked to bring dessert to neighborhood barbecues. David worked in commercial real estate. He wore fitted suits, shook hands too hard, and always knew how to sound generous in public. I taught part-time at a community college and ran a small editing business from home. I made less money than him, but I made our life work. I remembered birthdays, paid the bills on time, called the plumber, sent sympathy cards, brought soup to sick neighbors, and made sure his mother, Evelyn, never spent a holiday alone. Evelyn was not an easy woman, but she was mine in the way family becomes yours after years of shared tables and emergencies. She had sharp opinions, sharper cheekbones, and a habit of correcting people's grammar during emotional conversations. But she had also brought me groceries when I had pneumonia. She had taught me how to make peach cobbler without measuring anything. And once, after David yelled at me in the kitchen during our 3rd year of marriage, she waited until he left and said quietly, "My son learned some ugly things from his father. Don't let him convince you they're love." That sentence stayed with me. So when Evelyn fell in her kitchen and broke her hip, I packed a bag before David even finished telling me. "I'll drive with you," I said. "She'll need someone calm there." David was standing by the counter, reading the hospital text from his sister, Caroline. His jaw tightened. "No," he said. I stopped with my hand inside the linen closet. "No. She asked for peace. She asked for peace from me." He sighed like I was being dramatic. "Mara, she's embarrassed. She doesn't want a crowd. She doesn't want people fussing over her." "I'm not people. I'm family. She specifically said she only wants me there for now." That hurt, but I swallowed it. Evelyn could be proud. Maybe she did not want me seeing her weak. Maybe she wanted her son first, so I stayed home the first night, then the second, then the third. Every evening, David came home later, smelling like hospital soap and coffee. Every evening, I asked how Evelyn was. Every evening, he gave me answers that sounded like headlines instead of truth. "Surgery went fine. She's tired. Physical therapy starts Monday. She needs peace." That phrase became a locked door. On the 5th day, I made chicken soup and packed it in a thermos with Evelyn's favorite soft rolls from the bakery. When David saw the bag by the door, his face changed so quickly I almost missed it. Not anger exactly. Fear. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm bringing this to your mother. I told you she doesn't want visitors. It has been 5 days. And she is still recovering. I can leave it at the nurse's station." New. 1 word. Flat. Final. I stared at him. "Why not?" "Because this is not about you." I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because my body needed to release something before it cracked. "David, I am trying to bring soup to your injured mother. And I am trying to respect her wishes." He took the bag from the table and put it in the refrigerator like he was putting away evidence. That night, I called Evelyn's room from the number on the hospital website. It rang 9 times and went to the nurse's station. Room 412. A woman answered. "Hi. This is Mara Whitmore. I'm Evelyn Whitmore's daughter-in-law. Could I speak with her?" There was a pause. Then the nurse said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. The patient has a privacy restriction?" "A what?" "A restriction on calls and visitors." "Who placed it?" "I'm not allowed to disclose that." I already knew. When I confronted David, he did not deny it. He simply looked annoyed that I had found out. "It keeps things simple," he said. "For whom? For Mom? Or for you. His eyes went cold. Be careful. It was the way he said it that made me quiet. Not because I was afraid of his volume. David rarely yelled. He did something worse. He lowered his voice until you felt like a child standing in front of a principal's desk. For 10 years, I had called that composure. I was beginning to wonder if it was control. The next 4 weeks changed the shape of my life. At first, I tried to be patient. I told myself Evelyn was proud. I told myself hospitals had rules. I told myself David was stressed and handling it badly. But small things started to happen. David began taking calls in the garage. He changed the password on his laptop and said the company required it. He came home with scratches on his neck and told me a cardboard box had slipped while he was moving things from Evelyn's house. Then I noticed his wedding ring was missing. It's at the jeweler, he said when I asked. For what? Resizing. Your finger hasn't changed size in 10 years. His mouth tightened. Do you want me to list every ounce I've gained since 40? It was a clever answer. David was good at clever answers. They made you feel petty for asking simple questions. 2 weeks after Evelyn's fall, Caroline called me. Caroline was David's younger sister, and the only person in that family who could make silence sound accusing. She lived in Cincinnati, had 3 children, and texted in complete sentences with punctuation like she was filing a complaint. Have you seen Mom? She asked. No. David says, she doesn't want me there. Caroline was quiet. What? I asked. He told me you were too busy. The room went still. He told you what? That you had work deadlines and didn't want to deal with hospital stuff. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Caroline, I have tried to go. He told me she needed peace. He placed a privacy restriction. Another silence. Then she said, he told the hospital I was not to be contacted unless he approved it. My skin went cold. Why would he do that? I whispered. I was hoping you knew. That was the first crack in the wall. The second came 3 days later, when a bank envelope arrived addressed to Evelyn at our house. That alone was strange. Evelyn's mail went to her little brick ranch on Maple Street. David said he was collecting it for her, but why would the bank send something here? I did not open it. I only held it up when he walked in. Why is your mother's bank sending mail to our house? He took the envelope too quickly. I changed the mailing address while she's in rehab. Without telling Caroline, his face hardened. Why are you talking to Caroline about my mother's finances? Because something is wrong. No, Mara. Something is wrong with you. You're bored, and you're making a crisis because you feel left out. There it was. The knife wrapped in velvet. I wanted to shout. Instead, I watched him take the envelope into his office and lock the door. That night, I slept in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. At 20:13 am, I woke up to the sound of David moving through the hallway. I kept my eyes closed when the light passed under the door. He went downstairs. I waited 5 minutes, then followed. From the landing, I saw him at the dining table with a stack of papers. He was speaking softly into his phone. No, she won't challenge it. She doesn't even know what she's looking at. My breath caught. He listened. Then he said, the house goes first. After that, we deal with the accounts. The house. Evelyn's house. The little brick ranch with the peach tree in the backyard, and the pantry shelves labeled in Evelyn's neat handwriting. I stepped backward before he could see me. My foot hit the bottom stair. The wood creaked. David looked up. For 2 seconds, neither of us moved. Then he smiled. Not warmly, not gently. It was the kind of smile people use when they are closing a drawer on something sharp. Couldn't sleep, he asked. What house goes first? He put his phone face down. You misunderstood. No, I heard you. You heard a fragment of a business call. At 2 a.m. My clients don't all live in Ohio. David. He stood. Go back to bed. I did not move. His voice softened, which somehow made it worse. Mara, you are tired. You are creating stories. My mother is sick. I am handling it. Stop trying to turn yourself into the hero. The old me would have apologized. The old me would have wondered if I was overreacting. But the old me had not heard his sister say he lied. The old me had not seen bank mail rerouted. The old me had not heard him say the house goes first. So I said, tomorrow, I'm going to the hospital. His smile disappeared. No, you're not. Watch me. I turned and walked upstairs before my knees could betray me. The next morning, my car would not start. I stood in the driveway pressing the ignition while the dashboard clicked uselessly. David appeared at the garage door wearing his charcoal suit. Battery? He asked. I looked at him. He lifted his eyebrows like innocence had been tailored onto his face. I can call roadside for you later. No need. I ordered a rideshare before he reached the end of the driveway. When the driver asked where to, I gave him the hospital address and watched David's face in the rearview mirror as we pulled away. For the first time in a month, he looked truly scared. At Riverside Memorial, The front desk clerk asked for my name. Mara Whitmore. I said. I'm here to see Evelyn Whitmore in room 412. She typed. Her expression changed. I'm sorry. You're not on the approved visitor list. I know. Then I can't. I need you to call the charge nurse. Ma'am, please. My voice cracked, but I held her eyes. Something is wrong. I'm her daughter-in-law. Her daughter has also been blocked. I believe her son is isolating her. The clerk hesitated. Then she picked up the phone. 10 minutes later, a nurse named Denise met me near the elevators. She was in her 50s, with silver threaded through her dark hair and the exhaustive kindness of someone who had seen every kind of family crisis and still chose to care. You're Mara, she asked. Yes. She studied my face. Do you have identification? I gave her my license. She looked at it, then lowered her voice. Mrs. Whitmore has asked for you several times. The hallway blurred. What? She asked for Mara. She asked why Mara never came. My hand flew to my mouth. Denise's jaw tightened. Her son said you refused. I closed my eyes. There are kinds of betrayal that make you scream, and then there are kinds that make you so still you can hear your own heart learning a new rhythm. He lied, I said. I thought he might have. Why? Denise looked down the hallway before answering. Because yesterday when he left, she grabbed my sleeve and asked me to hide something. That was when she placed the folded note in my hand. Mara, I am not safe with him. My knees nearly gave out. Denise caught my elbow. Sit down, she said. But I could not sit. I could only look through the door at Evelyn. Can I see her? Denise nodded. 5 minutes. If she wakes up, keep your voice calm. Her blood pressure spikes when she's upset. I entered the room like it was a church. Evelyn's eyes opened when I touched her hand. For a moment, she stared at me as if she was deciding whether I was real. Then tears slid sideways into her hair. Oh, Mara, she whispered. I thought you believed him. I leaned over her bed. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Her fingers tightened around mine with surprising strength. Made me sign papers? What papers? I don't know. I was on pain medicine. He kept saying it was insurance, hospital, rehab. He covered the pages with his hand. My stomach turned. Did you sign a power of attorney? I signed something. Evelyn, listen to me. What does he want? Her eyes filled with fear. The house. My accounts. Everything your father-in-law left. But there's a blue folder? In the freezer. The freezer? In the garage freezer, under the peaches. A ghost of her old sharpness returned. No thief looks under frozen peaches. Despite everything, I almost laughed. Ed, she pulled me closer. If anything happens to me, give it to Caroline. And Mara. Yes. Don't confront David alone. I should have listened. But by then, anger had begun replacing fear, and anger makes you think you are taller than you are. I called Caroline from the hospital parking lot. By the time I finished telling her everything, she was already grabbing her keys. I'll meet you at Mom's house in 90 minutes, she said. Bring your husband. No. I'm bringing my lawyer. That was when I remembered Caroline did not just text like a woman filing complaints. She filed complaints for a living. Her lawyer, a calm woman named Priya Nair, arrived at Evelyn's house before Caroline did. She wore black slacks, no jewelry except a watch, and had the energy of someone who could make a liar sweat by asking for the date. The lock on Evelyn's front door had been changed. Caroline stared at it. He changed my mother's locks. I checked under the ceramic frog on the porch, because Evelyn had hidden a spare key there since 1988. Empty. Priya said, don't break anything. We need everything clean. Caroline called a locksmith. While we waited, I walked around the house and saw tire marks near the garage. Fresh ones. The side gate was open. Inside the garage, through the dusty window, I could see boxes stacked near the door. Moving boxes. David was already clearing the house. The locksmith opened the door at 4:12 p.m. I remember the time because room 412 had become a number burned into my mind. The house smelled like dust, lavender cleaner, and violation. Drawers were open. Photo frames sat face down on the dining table. Evelyn's silver tea set was gone from the cabinet. In her bedroom, the jewelry box empty except for one pearl earring and a safety pin. Caroline made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not a sob. Not a word. Something animal. Priya photographed everything. Freezer, I said. We went to the garage. The freezer hummed in the corner beneath a shelf of gardening tools. I lifted the lid. Cold air rushed up against my face. Bags of peaches were stacked neatly on the right, labeled in Evelyn's handwriting. August. Lemon juice added. Use for cobbler. My throat tightened. I moved the peaches. At the bottom, wrapped in 2 plastic grocery bags and sealed with duct tape, was a blue folder. Caroline covered her mouth. Priya put on gloves. Inside the folder were copies of Evelyn's original will, bank statements, house deed records, and a notarized document naming Caroline and me as joint medical advocates if Evelyn could not speak for herself. Me. Not David. There was also a handwritten letter. Mara, if you are reading this, then my son has become what I feared. I did not want to believe it. No mother wants to name the darkness in her own child. But David has been pressing me for months to sell the house and transfer money to him. I refused. If he says I changed my mind, he is lying. If he says I wanted you kept away, he is lying. You have been kinder to me than my own blood has been brave. Protect Caroline. Protect yourself. At the bottom, Evelyn had signed her full name. Caroline sat down on an overturned bucket and wept. Preya's face stayed calm, but her voice changed. We need to move quickly. That was the moment David walked into the garage. He looked from me to Caroline to Preya to the blue folder in Preya's hands. For once, he had no clever answer ready. What are you doing here? He asked. Caroline stood. In our mother's house. That's a brave question. David looked at me. Mara, come outside. No, come. His eyes sharpened. This is a family matter. I surprised myself by laughing. That line worked better when you hadn't spent a month telling everyone I wasn't family. Preya stepped between us. Mr. Whitmore. I'm advising everyone here not to discuss this further without counsel. He sneered. And you are. The attorney, who is about to make your afternoon very difficult. David's phone rang. He ignored it. Then mine rang. It was Denise from the hospital. I answered with my eyes on David. Mara. Denise said, breathless. David just called the floor and said you are mentally unstable and not allowed near Evelyn. Security is reviewing the chart now. You need to come back with legal paperwork immediately. I repeated it out loud so everyone could hear. David's face went white. Preya closed the blue folder. Good, she said. Now he has given us witnesses. Justice does not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrives with photocopies, timestamps, and a lawyer who knows exactly which desk to visit first. Preya drove us straight back to Riverside Memorial. On the way, she made 3 calls. 1 to the hospital patient advocate, 1 to the county probate court clerk, 1 to a detective she knew from elder financial abuse cases. Caroline sat in the back seat clutching Evelyn's letter, like it was the last piece of her mother's still untouched. I sat in the front, staring at the road, remembering every time David had told me I was sensitive. Confused, dramatic, bored, left out. Those words had not been descriptions, they had been locks. At the hospital, security was already near the front desk. David stood beside them in his expensive suit, speaking calmly, looking wounded in the way men like him look wounded when consequences enter the room. When he saw Preya, his expression flickered. When he saw Caroline, it cracked. When he saw me holding my phone, recording openly, it hardened into something ugly. Mara, he said, turn that off. No, you are embarrassing yourself. No, David, I am documenting you. The patient advocate, a woman named Ms. Alvarez, led us into a small conference room. Denise came too. So did the charge nurse, a hospital administrator, and 2 security officers. David tried to take control immediately. My wife has been under a lot of stress, he said. She's become fixated on my mother's condition and has been harassing staff. I almost smiled. He still thought the room belonged to him. Preya opened her briefcase. Before Mr. Whitmore continues, we have documentation naming Mara Whitmore and Caroline Reed as Mrs. Evelyn Whitmore's medical advocates. We also have a handwritten statement from Mrs. Whitmore indicating she did not consent to being isolated from them. David scoffed. That is old paperwork. Preya placed copies on the table. Signed, notarized, and never revoked. Ms. Alvarez looked at the documents. Mr. Whitmore, did you provide the hospital any power of attorney paperwork? David leaned back. Yes. May I see the copy in the chart? Preya asked. The administrator pulled up the file on a tablet. Preya read it once. Then twice she said, this document is dated 3 days after Mrs. Whitmore's hip surgery. So? David said. Dinez's voice was quiet. That was the day she was on IV pain medication and disoriented. The room changed. It was subtle, but I felt it. The air shifted away from David. Ms. Alvarez turned to him. Were you present when she signed? I helped my mother with paperwork. Was there an independent witness? Preya asked. David's jaw moved. The administrator enlarged the digital scan. The witness signature was a name I recognized. Lena Brooks, David's assistant. I laughed once under my breath because of course he had used the same 26-year-old assistant who sent him calendar invites at midnight and called him D. in text previews he thought I had not seen. Caroline looked at me. Who is Lena Brooks? David said, a colleague. I said, his assistant. And unless she recently became a hospital employee, she had no business witnessing a medicated patient sign anything. Preya looked almost pleased. That will be useful. David stood. This is ridiculous. I am her son. Evelyn's voice came from the doorway. Yes, she said. And that has been your shield for too long. Every head turned. Denise had brought Evelyn in a wheelchair. She looked fragile, but her eyes were clear. Her white hair was brushed back. and someone had wrapped a hospital blanket around her shoulders like a cape. David's face collapsed into panic before he rebuilt it. "Mom, you should be resting." "I have been resting," Evelyn said. "For 38 years, I rested inside the hope that you would become a better man." No one spoke. She looked at Ms. Alvarez. "I want the privacy restriction removed. I want my daughter and my daughter-in-law allowed to see me. And I want my son removed from my medical decisions." David stepped toward her. "Mom, don't do this in front of strangers." Evelyn lifted one trembling finger. "The strangers are the reason I am safe enough to speak." That sentence broke something in him. Not his conscience. I am not sure David had given that part of himself much exercise. It broke his performance. "You ungrateful old woman," he snapped. The room froze. There it was. The voice I had heard in whispers. The voice behind closed doors. The voice he hid under suits and sympathy. Evelyn did not flinch. Caroline did. I did too. But my phone was still recording. Security moved closer. David looked around and realized too late that he had finally said the quiet part in a room full of witnesses. Within 48 hours, the temporary medical authority he had claimed was suspended pending review. Within a week, a judge issued an emergency order protecting Evelyn's assets while the contested documents were investigated. The police opened an elder financial abuse inquiry. Lena Brooks, when questioned, admitted she had not seen Evelyn sign anything. She said David handed her the paper already signed and told her it was just a family form. I wish I could say I felt victorious. I did not. At first, I felt hollow. Because revenge in real life is not fireworks. It is sitting in a courthouse hallway with vending machine coffee, while your husband of 10 years avoids your eyes. It is calling a locksmith for a woman who taught you cobbler. It is watching your sister-in-law discover boxes of her mother's life packed like merchandise. But justice has its own quiet satisfaction. David's company placed him on leave when the investigation touched his real estate clients. 2 of them had invested in the quick sale he was arranging for Evelyn's house, a sale that would have moved the property through an LLC connected to a friend of his. His polished circle did what polished circles always do. When scandal appears, they stepped back and pretended they had never stood close. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning. David was served outside his office, in front of the glass doors where he used to kiss me on the cheek when people were watching. He called me 11 times. I answered once. "You're making a mistake?" he said. "No," I told him. "I made the mistake 10 years ago. This is the correction. You'll regret humiliating me." I looked across Evelyn's kitchen, where Caroline was labeling boxes properly, this time keep, donate, archive. Evelyn sat at the table drinking tea, alive, furious, and safe. "David," I said, "you humiliated yourself." I just stopped cleaning it up. Then I hung up. 6 months later, Evelyn moved into a smaller apartment near Caroline, with wide doors, good light, and a balcony where she grew tomatoes in red pots. She sold the house legally, on her own terms, to a young couple who promised to keep the peach tree. At the closing, she wore red lipstick and used her own pen. Afterward, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was the original note from the hospital, the one Denise had given me. Beneath it was a new note, written in Evelyn's careful hand. "Mara, you came when the truth called. That is family," I cried in the parking lot like a child. Not because everything was fixed. Some things never returned to their old shape after betrayal. My marriage was over. My trust had scars. Evelyn still woke some nights afraid David was in the doorway. But fear was no longer running the house. That mattered. A year later, I stood on Evelyn's balcony with a bowl of peaches between us. The evening sun turned the tomatoes gold. Caroline's children were laughing inside. Somewhere across town, David was fighting charges, lawsuits, and the kind of loneliness that finds people when their masks stop working. Evelyn sliced a peach with slow, careful hands. "You know," she said, "I used to think peace meant keeping quiet." I looked at her. And now, she handed me a slice. "Now I think peace is what comes after the truth is finally allowed to make noise." I smiled because I understood. For a month, my husband kept me away from a hospital room by calling it peace. But real peace was not silence. Real peace was a locked door opened, a hidden photo found, a frightened woman believed, and a liar forced to hear his own words echo back in a room full of witnesses. And if anyone ever asks me when my marriage truly ended, I will not say it ended in court. I will say it ended in a hospital hallway, with a folded note in my shaking hands, when 7 words made my knees buckle and gave me the strength to stand up. "Mara, I am not safe with him." That was the sentence that broke my heart. And it was also the sentence that set us free.